More than 3 centuries ago, American bootleggers made corn whiskey by moonlight to avoid being detected by the tax authorities. And so this whiskey became known as moonshine. Today, that whiskey has emerged from the shadows of history and is produced legally. But people still call it moonshine. It was the nectar of outlaws. Clear, fresh corn whiskey that's 50% alcohol. And centuries later, it still has a potent appeal. In Virginia, they still make this whiskey the traditional way, allowing corn to germinate in a process called malting. They mix a small amount of the malted kernels with regular corn in a big tank, then funnel the mix into a mill. Inside this mill, automated hammers grind the mix to a cornmeal consistency. This frees some of the starch and exposes it to enzymes from the malted kernels. Those enzymes convert the starch to sugar. They'll use some of this ground corn to make a big batch of yeast. They add it to water in a tank and boil it until it becomes a thick soup. Once it reaches the desired consistency, they allow it to cool to room temperature. They add yeast and blow air into the mix to help the yeast grow, making this one big batch of liquid yeast. In another tank, a ton of corn is being blended with water and boiled. This breaks down more of the starch, converting it to sugar. Once cooled, they pump the mix and the liquefied yeast into the fermentation tank. Over a period of 4 days, the yeast turns the sugar to alcohol. The process also generates carbon dioxide, which is vented into the atmosphere. Every so often, the brewmaster scoops up some liquid and scrutinizes it. If it looks too thick, the conversion of sugar to alcohol is not yet complete. But when the viscosity is just right, they pump the batch into a big copper still. It's just like the type used to make moonshine in the backwoods centuries ago. They heat it to 82 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, alcohol will boil, but water will not. As the alcohol boils off the mix, it's recovered through a condenser. The recovered liquid is 80% alcohol. Talk about a stiff drink. So they add water to cut it down to about 50%, and then it's ready to bottle. To make a darker whiskey, they steep it with what looks like a big tea bag. It's actually wood chips wrapped in cheesecloth. The whiskey absorbs flavor and color from the wood over a period of about 2 months. When the whiskey takes on a golden hue, they transfer it into oak barrels. They allow the whiskey to age for 2 years in a hot room. The heat causes the whiskey to expand, causing it to absorb the flavor of the wood. But the pressure can also cause cracks in the barrels, so the brewmaster routinely checks for leaks. After the whiskey has aged, they adjust the alcohol content by adding a little water. The water is always softened and filtered to remove minerals that could affect the whiskey's taste. At the bottling station, machinery pumps the whiskey into the containers. There's no spillage, and not a drop goes to waste. Machinery then twists on the caps for an airtight seal that preserves the aroma and flavor of this old-fashioned corn whiskey. At the next station, robotic arms grab labels, apply glue to them, then press them onto the bottles. It has taken a combination of down-home methodology and modern technology to prepare this old-fashioned American whiskey for market. And whether it's aged or fresh, this historic whiskey is sure to set the taste buds ablaze. Twisting plant or animal fibers into yarn dates back to ancient times, when people fashioned primitive spindles out of sticks. Around 500 BC, the spinning wheel was born in India. Today's factories have fully automated spinning machines that work on the same principle as the spinning wheel. This is a 2-ply commercial yarn, the kind factories use to weave fabric for making jeans and tops. It's made from large bales of raw cotton. Cotton comes from a plant, so naturally some leaves and stems are mixed in with the cotton fibers. To remove them, the first machine passes over the bales and removes a layer of cotton 2/10 of an inch wide. Then sends it through a duct system to the blending and cleaning machine. The machine processes half a ton of cotton per hour. The cotton comes out evenly blended and cleaner, but still not clean enough. So it goes into a second cleaning machine, which finishes the job. Now the cotton goes through what's called a carding machine. It has huge rollers with wire teeth. They comb out the tangled fibers and line them up in parallel rows. The machine also discards any fibers that are too short to process. Next stop, the coiler. This device takes the rows of fibers and forms them into a thick and loose first stage yarn called sliver. The slivers move on to the drawing machine. It lines them up 6 at a time and draws them out, stretching them to form a second stage yarn. Then a machine called a roving frame stretches this second stage yarn, strengthening it by thinning it out. Until it looks like this. This third stage yarn is called roving. Depending on the type of yarn they're making, it's anywhere from 3.5 to 16 times thinner than sliver. They now stretch the roving up to 30 times thinner, which strengthens it even more. The yarn is finally finished. Now they have to transfer the yarn from all these small spools onto huge industrial-sized cones, 20 spools to a cone. One transfer method uses the winding machine. It winds the yarn from the first spool onto the cone. Then it automatically takes the back end of that yarn and attaches it with a knot to the front end of the yarn from the next spool. It winds it onto the cone, then attaches the back end to the front end from the next spool, and so on. As each spool empties, the machine automatically discards it. And while all that winding's going on, the machine's optical sensor, that white object you see crossing the screen, does a quality control check. If a portion of yarn doesn't meet specifications, the winding stops. The machine cuts off the offending portion, then reconnects the ends and resumes winding. This is airjet spinning, another method of making yarn from slivers and winding it onto giant spools known as tubes. A suction tube grabs the front end of one spool and connects it to the back end of the previous one, again with a tiny knot. Before fully automated machines like this were invented 50 years ago, all that knotting had to be done by hand. The thin finished yarn is 200 times lighter than the thick first stage yarn that came out of the carding machine. From start to finish, spinning this yarn has taken 48 hours. Cranberries are one of just a handful of fruits that are native to North America. Before the Europeans arrived, The Indians use them for food and medicine. The cranberry vine is well suited to a harsher climate. It thrives in low temperatures and loves acidic soil that's scarce in nutrients. Cranberries are ripe for the picking in late September. At harvest time, farmers flood their fields to make the cranberries float to the surface. Then they use a machine called a beater. It generates underwater turbulence, pulling the berries off the vines. The beater is suspended from a mobile bridge that's computer-guided to systematically work its way through the entire field. The beater cuts a swath about 23 feet wide with each sweep. Workers move the floating cranberries to one corner of the field. Where a pump transfers them to a waiting truck. Along the way, the berries get a preliminary rinsing to remove branches and leaves. At the factory, the truck unloads its cargo. The cranberries travel along a water canal and onto a conveyor belt. Then through a cleaning station, where workers use brushes and water jets to get rid of any remaining leaves and branches. Then they dump the cranberries into large bins to be frozen for up to several months. To produce cranberry juice, they defrost the frozen berries in hot water, then mash them, skins, seeds, and all, into a puree. They add special enzymes to break up the pectin molecules, making the puree less viscous and therefore easier to press. The press process is almost 9 tons of puree at a time. That's the weight of 1.5 elephants. It takes 3 to 4 pressing cycles to extract all the juice. The juice then goes through a sophisticated filtration system. The 216 filters remove any plant particles or bacteria larger than 1 micron. A micron is about 25,000 times smaller than an inch. Then they evaporate the water until the juice is 10 times more concentrated. Cranberries not destined for juice go through a grading process. Undersized berries drop down through the holes of a giant sifter. The bigger cranberries move on to the grading table, where workers remove any that are substandard. An electronic sorter then scans the remaining cranberries for color, signaling an air gun to blow any reject berries off the production line. The rest move on to the packaging department, or continue down the line to be dried. Cranberries destined for drying are automatically seeded, cut in half, and pressed, then soaked in a sugar and water solution to make them sweeter. The side-to-side motion of the conveyor belt spreads the berries thinly so that they'll dry evenly. The hot air dryer subjects them to temperatures varying from 86 to 176 degrees Fahrenheit. After about 3 hours, the cranberries come out looking like this. As you sip your cranberry tea, ponder this. Cranberries are a source of potassium and vitamins A and C, and drinking cranberry juice can prevent and treat urinary tract infections. Crop dusters are airplanes specially outfitted for aerial spraying. Farmers use them to seed fields and apply pesticides and fertilizer. The aquaculture industry uses them to feed fish. And emergency crews fly them to spread retardant on forest fires and dispersants on oil spills. Depending on its size, a crop duster can carry up to 2,700 liters of liquid or dry material. The plane is designed to be able to swoop down low to accurately cover the target spray area. At the factory, they manually weld lightweight aircraft-grade steel tubes to construct the frame of the fuselage. Next, they use spring-loaded fasteners to affix aluminum panels to the sides. An anti-rust coating turns the aluminum golden color. All the plane's aluminum parts require this coating because many of the chemicals crop dusters carry are corrosive. The tank that holds those chemicals is called a hopper. The factory molds it out of many layers of fiberglass, which is deliberately transparent. This enables the pilot to see at a glance roughly how much chemical remains. Inside each of the plane's wings is a row of vertical supports called webs. To make each web, they lay a soft aluminum sheet on a mold, place a rubber mat on top, then load the assembly into a press. A built-in water bag distributes the pressure evenly. This helps form the aluminum sheet perfectly. Next, they soak the web for a half hour in molten sodium chloride at more than 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Then they immediately submerge the web in lukewarm water. This triggers a molecular reaction that hardens the aluminum. Each wing contains 32 webs. Technicians line them up in an assembly fixture in between the wing's horizontal beams called spars. Once they've riveted the webs to the spars, they cover the structure with aluminum panels, using spring clamps for now. The panels have holes in them to allow regular inspections of the structure inside. After riveting the panels, technicians screw covers onto the inspection holes. They also seal the seams between panels with liquid rubber so chemicals can't penetrate. Next, they install the engine and the propeller, which ranges from 750 to 1,400 horsepower. The prop has from 3 to 5 aluminum blades. Now, the equipment that releases the chemicals from the air. For spraying liquids, they hook up horizontal pipes lined with spray nozzles called booms. To apply dry chemicals or disperse seed, the flight crew detaches the booms and installs a large stainless steel funnel called a spreader under the plane's belly. At release time, the pilot opens a door at the bottom of the hopper, enabling the wind to draw out the contents through the spreader. To spray liquids, a wind-driven pump moves the hopper contents to the booms. Technicians now assemble and install the instrumentation panel. To fill the hopper with liquid chemicals, they connect a pump to a valve on the side of the crop duster. For dry chemicals, they just lift the hopper's lid and fill her up. Dental work dates back to ancient Egypt, when people used animal teeth and pieces of bone to replace their own teeth. It couldn't have been pretty. But today, high-tech dental crowns can transform damaged teeth into pearly whites that look just like all the rest. A dental crown starts with a plaster impression of the mouth. It goes to a laboratory where they cut it into segments to isolate the tooth in need of restoration. They scan it into a computer and send the dimensions electronically to the factory. There, machinery pumps liquid plaster into molds to create cylinders called blanks. The plaster blanks take about 10 minutes to harden, then move on to cure for an additional 12 hours. At the next station, a robot installs a blank in a milling machine. A computerized cutting tool sculpts the blank, guided by the scanned data of the plaster replica. It makes a duplicate that's 20 to 30% larger to allow for material shrinkage later in production. Next, a device dips the plaster tooth in liquid ceramic, which hardens into a non-stick glaze. The next robot orients the tooth along with several others in a circular holder, ready for the next phase of production. Nozzles funnel ceramic powder into molds, arranged in a matching circular configuration. A robot then inserts the tooth replicas in the corresponding molds. A worker stacks several of the mold platters and threads them together with a metal rod. He transfers the rack of mold platters to the next worker, who plunges it into a water-filled chamber. He closes the lid and activates a pressurizing system. As the liquid pressurizes, it compresses the ceramic powder, solidifying it. This process takes just 10 minutes. Another automated tool now chisels away the excess ceramic, following the profile of the plaster tooth replica that's still inside. This creates the ceramic shell of the dental crown called the coping. It's removed from the plaster replica thanks to the non-stick glaze. Baking the coping at a very high temperature toughens the ceramic. It also shrinks the crown shell to the final size. They carve a plastic copy of the tooth using the same data scanned into the computer earlier. They use this plastic replica to test the fit of the ceramic one. A technician inspects the ceramic for chips or cracks, then packages it for shipping. This tooth-like shell is now on its way to the laboratory, where it will get the finishing touches that will transform it into a crown. When it arrives at the lab, a technician paints several layers of porcelain onto it. The color will change to a more realistic hue once they fire it in a special furnace. The furnace pumps out air or other gases that would hinder the transfer of heat, as it bakes the porcelain to a very dense consistency. After all the layers have been applied, a technician textures the surface with a sharp tool. Then she sculpts it to give it tooth-like contours. Finally, she brushes on a clear ceramic glaze, which mimics the look of tooth enamel. Ceramic crowns like these take about 5 days to make. They'll look and function just like any other tooth. And no one need ever know the secret behind that beautiful smile. In 1886, an American woman invented the automatic dishwasher. Josephine Cochran built a motorized wheel with wire compartments for dishes, turning inside a copper tank filled with soapy boiling water. It was a hit with restaurants and hotels, but it wasn't until the 1950s that affordable dishwashers for home kitchens came on the market. Building a dishwasher starts with a watertight container called the tub. Some high-end models have stainless steel tubs. The rest have tubs made of molded plastic, usually polypropylene. Workers screw 2 pairs of plastic wheels to each side of the tub. They'll support the sliders on which the upper dish rack moves. The lower dish rack rolls along the bottom of the tub. This steel frame helps solidify the tub. They affix a steel plate at the bottom to shield the plastic from heat of the motor. Then they attach steel legs to the frame. Here they install a rubber reservoir called the sump. It collects the water that flows to the bottom of the tub. They screw in a 2-part ring to hold the sump in place. The heating element is a ceramic insulated iron cable. This filter traps food particles washing off the dishes. After fitting an O-ring seal to make the sump leak-proof, they secure the heating element by screwing ceramic insulators to the protruding connectors. Now for the polypropylene wash arms. This model has one at the bottom, with a tower that juts out for a larger spray span, and a second wash arm at the top. The motor pumps clean water directly to the bottom wash arm and through this flexible hose to the top wash arm. Once they connect the hose, they spin the wash arm to make sure there's no obstruction. Meanwhile, workers connect key components to the dishwasher circuit board. This metal box is the timer. It controls the wash and dry cycles. For example, it activates this green cam lever to trigger the white lever to open the detergent dispenser at the right moment in the wash cycle. The detergent dispenser is located on a plastic panel that will line the dishwasher's door. They call this panel the inner door. This seal will prevent water from leaking out and also provide some soundproofing. A press runs over the inner door, driving in the seal evenly all around. Now they screw the inner door to the outer door. The assembled door hooks onto hinges at the base of the tub. This machine presses the hook and hinge together so that the door doesn't come unhinged. The dishwasher's motor is relatively quiet because it uses an inherently low-noise induction drive design. The white machine attached to the motor is a food disposer. It grinds up food particles so that they don't clog the drain. The last technical step is to connect the various wires. Before applying the finishing touches, workers conduct a seal test. They flush each tub with water to check for leaks. In this portable dishwasher, workers install cement blocks as a counterweight so that the washer won't tip forward when you open the door. And because a portable usually sits in full view, it also needs sides and a top. The top is decorative laminate on medium-density fiberboard. They screw it to what's called the wrapper, a 3-sided panel made of painted steel that covers the sides and back. A clean look to go with your clean dishes.